Joe, let me go overseas for a moment. You're against the efforts in some European countries for austerity, and you said they haven't worked. Also, a while back you said, don't worry about Greece. Greece is going to be okay. How do you feel now?
Well, I was always somewhat worried about Greece, and what worried me most was the policies that the Troika, which is the European Central Bank, IMF, and the EU Commission, were imposing on Greece. And the reason I was worried was they were doing an extreme form of austerity. Austerity is just another name for what Herbert Hoover did in the United States after the stock market crash. What Herbert Hoover did was called, slash, cut back, and it worked in converting the stock market crash into the Great Depression. So you would have thought that experience, maybe other countries would be cautious. The IMF then tried the same medicine in East Asia. I was chief economist of the World Bank. I fought it, and they had these major cutbacks, again, austerity in Thailand, Indonesia, Korea. Worked just like our theory said it would. Austerity led to converted downturns into recessions, recessions into depressions. In the main island of Indonesia, Java, the unemployment rate got up to 40%. So to me, it was amazing that after all those experiments, the Troika decided to try that experiment one more time, and that was on Greece. Well, I can report years after that began. It began in 2010. We're in 2015. What has been the outcome? GDP per capita in Greece is 25% what it was below the beginning of the crisis, a deeper downturn than the American Great Depression. Average unemployment in Greece is 25%. Youth unemployment is over 60%. Now, it's been that way for a half a decade. There's no prospect for things getting better. The program, as they call it, that Europe foisted on Greece had a surplus, what they call, to pay back the people who had lent it money, of 4.5%. No country has ever maintained that kind of surplus for long. So I thought it was going to be a disaster, and it turned out to be pretty much what I thought would be. What was so amazing is you look at the forecast of the IMF, the ECB, the European Central Bank, they have these charts about Greece recovering very quickly. And then the next year they say, things didn't turn out that way. They move the same charts of it recovering quickly, but move it down by 1 year. And then it turns out it goes down a little bit more, and then they shift the curve down a little bit more. Not a surprise to me that the Greek voters said, this isn't working, and they elected the Syriza party, but the voters were almost, overwhelmingly saying, we want to change. The parties that have brought us this disaster need to get out. And so they moved, one group went to the far right, and the other went somewhat to the left, and they got a new government. And I have to share with you a little bit. In the last couple of weeks, I've spent a lot of time with the German finance minister, with the Greek finance minister, with one of the presidents of the European countries. I am very worried. I think there is a very high likelihood that Europe won't make it. And we'll find out, but it will have to take intervention at the highest level. I mean, Angela Merkel will have to say, we don't want to be blamed for destroying Europe for the third time in 101 years.
The, Greece may be esoteric to some of us, but on Friday, the stock market tanked partly because of worries about Greece. And we've seen this really seesaw stock market, hundreds of points a day, up and down. What's your view?
Well, I think were Greeks to leave the EU, it would almost surely present a lot of short-running stability, but it would even make things worse in the medium term. And by that I mean, here are just a couple of things. If Greece succeeds, and I'm hopeful that it would, but let's say it succeeds, when Argentina broke its exchange rate with the dollar, and restructured its debt, it experienced very rapid growth. In fact, it became the second fastest growing country in the world, over 8% from 2002 until the great crisis of 2008. So there can be life after leaving an exchange rate system. So it can work. If they succeed, other countries will leave. Spain has a youth unemployment rate of 50%, better than 60%. But can you imagine what it would be like year after year? You played by the rules, you went to school, you studied hard, and still no job. Not only you have no job, your friends don't have no job, and families are being torn apart because the young people who are leaving the country, and they won't come back. A lot of them won't come back. So it's really devastating. The largest party in Spain now is the party that is like the Syriza party in Greece. And the other parties are parties like in Catalan, in Barcelona, who want to break away from Spain. So it's a political disaster. But think of the other outcome. So that's if Greece succeeds. If Greece doesn't succeed, you have in the southern part of Europe a failed state. I would not want to have a failed state in the southern part of Europe. I would not want to have a state that might be cozying up with Putin, that might be a place where all kinds of illicit activities go on. People have to survive in one way or another. We've seen that. We saw what happened when we had the failed states in the Balkans. So whatever way you see it, it doesn't look bright for the future. And one of the things that I was shocked about was with the finance minister of Germany seemed almost nonchalant about this. And as I say, I really feel strongly, not only that, but then you ask you can ask the question, what happens the next time another country, say Spain, has a problem, has an election, Syriza gets elected? What will happen then? Everybody will say, oh, it's next in line. And so markets will lose confidence, money will start leaving Spain, the problems will get worse, and we'll have a repeat and a repeat and repeat. It won't be good, either for Europe or for the global economy.
Joe, you mentioned failed state. After the beginning of the Iraq War, the Bush administration said the price tag of that war would be $60 billion. And you began talking in trillions. And the administration derided you. They said that was ridiculous. And now, what is it?
Well, it's well over $3 trillion. Let me just give you one number that people haven't grasped. We were very conservative. We said that in the book because we didn't want people to say we were exaggerating. And the reality was ugly enough. Even the conservative version of the reality was ugly enough. And that's why we call the book The $3 Trillion War. But we estimated at the time, based on earlier data, that about 39% of the people coming back from the war would have disabilities. The numbers, as they've turned out, have been closer to 50%. And they're coming back not just with one disability, but with 3 and 4 disabilities. So that we now estimate the total cost of just the disabilities. We're not talking about the equipment, we're not talking about, all the armor and the paying the salaries of the troops. Just talking about the cost of disability, the health care and disability pay of those who've served our country is in excess of $1 trillion alone. And the Bush administration said the whole war was going to cost $60 billion.
Joe, I have a few questions here involving China. Now, Hank Paulson, in his new book, raises real concerns about China. Big story in the Times today, right? Also, China has led the movement to creating what in effect is an Asian World Bank. And most of the major countries have endorsed it, except one. Which one? Tell us.
Joe, the United States. Not only didn't we endorse it, let me just say, the U.S. government made an enormous strategic mistake. It went around to countries all over the world. I talked to one of the finance minister in one of the Asian countries, and they had their arm twisted to the point where it was almost broken, not to join. In the end, almost everybody joined.
Japan did not, right?
Japan didn't join, but that was not the country it was one of the countries who really needed the money. That was what was so sad. The country really, really desperately needed the money, and we didn't say, oh, by the way, don't join and we'll give you the money. We said, don't join and pray.
One member of the audience thinks we should stay here all night. The question is...
Oh, can I just talk a little bit about the banks?
Oh, please.
Because I actually was, there have been 2 banks that have been created. One is called the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the other one is called the New Development Bank, which is the BRICS Bank, the bank of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They got together, and I worked very hard behind the scenes, partly because for the creation of that, and these were very diverse people, and you had to get them all to talk the same language, convince them that it wasn't hard to convince them that the world really needs these new institutions. One of the problems of the world today is a lack of demand. Lack of demand is causing more unemployment. More unemployment is causing more inequality. A few years ago, Ben Bernanke said the problem was a savings glut. He tried to blame China for that. The world doesn't have too much savings. If I look around the world, what I see is huge needs for investment for retrofitting the world for climate change, investments in Africa for infrastructure, investments in New York City for infrastructure, investments for education and technology all over. So the problem wasn't it wasn't too much savings. It wasn't a lack of good investment projects. It was a lack of financial institutions to bring the money from where it was to where it was needed. And so our idea was, why don't we create some new institutions that would help facilitate this movement? And that's what these 2 new institutions are about, headquartered both in Shanghai. But part of the reason for this was the difficulty of making the reforms that were needed to make the World Bank, the IMF, 21st century institutions. Now, interesting thing, the BRICS, those 5 countries, their income is larger than the income of the advanced countries at the 1944. So that gives you a picture of how much the world has changed. Another picture of how the world has changed. China is now the largest economy in the world by PPP, purchasing power parity, which is the way we compare. Now, there wasn't a lot of newspaper coverage in September when the U.S. became the number 2. I didn't see a lot of banners flying, so we finally number 2. It was something that in China they talked about it a little bit more. But the point I wanted to make is that with this new world order, we have to work better with the other countries so that we can create international institutions that actually do work.
But are you worried about China?
Yes. The worry is a little bit different than in the case of the United States at the 2008. Hank Paulson is raising the idea that there's some similarities between China today and the United States in 2007-8. Some of the differences are they're sitting on $4 trillion of reserves. So they have a war chest that is of enormous size. Secondly, they still have a lot more control over the economy than we did. So if they tell the banks to do something, our bankers don't always listen. You know, we told the banks to lend more to small and medium-sized enterprises, and they said, well, that's a very interesting idea, but they didn't do it. In China, if they tell the bankers to do something, there are more serious consequences, shall I say, of not doing what you're supposed to do. I'm not saying this with admiration, but it does mean that they have more instruments. And I think that they really realize that economic stability is absolutely necessary. You know, their justification for being in the position they are is that they're delivering on the economy. And if they can't do that, it will really undermine their whole political and economic system.
Okay, I have this question I mentioned